Welcome back, Time Crunched fans. And if this is your first time joining us, welcome to the show. The Time Crunch Cyclists podcast is where we take bigger, complicated training topics and condense them down into short, actionable podcast items so that you can take that and apply it to your own training. And we do it without all the BS. In fact, today I've got a guest who's a pro when it comes to sifting through all the BS out there. So I thought he would be just the guy for the interview. He's not actually a cyclist, though, so let's not hold that against him. Coach Jason Koop is our head coach for the ultra running program at CTS, author of The Essentials to Ultra Running, and one of the most knowledgeable practitioners about all things endurance. He's also just a damn good guy and a solid friend. So, Koop, welcome to the show.
Apparently, I'm going to add BS sifter to my business card. So
I think you should. I think you should. It would it'd really round your whole practice out, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's a portfolio ad.
It really is. It's really fun though, because we see a lot of BS out there, and I usually if there's something worthwhile, I use the litmus test of Koop to see where it's at, and he's usually got his finger on the pulse with stuff. So that being said, Koop, where the heck are you potting from today?
I am in Auburn, California.
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably 1 kilometer away from the finish line of where the Western States 100 will be in just a couple weeks' time. Yeah. So we've got a few athletes out here that I'm going to kind of take out on the course and just basically show them around town and do a little training camp.
Yeah, cool. Coupling, as I like to call it. Yeah,
we're definitely coupling. Yeah,
4 miles an hour all day.
Yep. Hey, that's a pretty successful ultra. 4 miles an hour, 3 miles an hour, man. Don't 4 miles an hour. You don't want to push it too much.
All right. Well, folks, to frame this podcast up, this show here, Koop and I, like I said, we keep tabs on some trendy stuff that's going on, and one of which has been sodium bicarbonate. I've had a lot of athletes asking me about it, and I'm seeing messaging through different feeds, podcasts, social media, sport nutrition sites. So, Koop, if our listeners are, dare I say, Bicarb Curious, what do we need to know about sodium bicarbonate before they go jack themselves with this new but old supplement?
Well, first off, everybody has this in their house. It's baking soda. Oh. Yeah, everybody has it in their house. I know. It's kind of mind-blowing.
Mm-hmm.
It's baking soda.
Yep.
It's normally either tucked back in your refrigerator because people would use it to just help their refrigerator smell better, or it's in your pantry as something that you could bake with, right? So anybody who's made a loaf of bread or
cookies,
made waffles, cookies, whatever your pastry or whatever your thing of choice is that you would choose to bake. Baking soda is one of those things that you might put into the batch in terms of some sort of ingredients. So it's a household item, and many years ago, as is the story with a lot of sports science supplements, somebody along the line said, hey, you know what? I wonder if we can repurpose this completely benign substance and give it to athletes and see if there is some sort of effect. It makes sense because, it's a base and, maybe the muscles are acidic. And if we could kind of start to ingest this, then we could kind of, neutralize what's going on. And lo and behold, 30 years ago now, maybe even 40 years, that practice of sodium bicarbonate loading started to be introduced into the athletic sphere. And I remember when I was in college, this is going way back a long, long time ago, when I was a very mediocre runner at Texas A&M University. I still have my class ring. Everybody who's watching the podcast and the video format can see, class of 2001. When I was a very, very mediocre runner, this is something that we would do. I ran the 800 meters and the 1500 meters and sometimes the 5,000 meter run. And we would take a couple of tablespoons of baking soda, and we would bicarbonate load. We'd put it in a little glass and we'd stir it around and try to get it dissolved and, chug it maybe 30 minutes before the race or so. And if you could get to the start line without any sort of GI distress, is actually, fairly beneficial for races of that of that duration. So I think the first thing that the kind of like listeners need to know is this practice is not all that new. We've done it for years. I've personally done it. At times turned me from a less than mediocre runner to a mediocre runner, right? That's the effects.
Moments.
That's the effect it has. Very, very small. But the limiting factor from an application standpoint has always been GI distress. And this is well documented across all of the literature, and anybody who has actually tried this is that most people, when they undertake this type of intervention, have not just a little bit, but a serious amount of GI distress.
So you're talking like burpee, I don't feel good, or are you talking like blowout situation?
Well, either or. Like a lot of people will, just because of the volume of fluid that you have to ingest and how much how basic it is, it could just literally disturb their intestines as they're ingesting it. And then sometimes, you actually get the shits. I mean, there's kind of like there's no way around it. And so that practice has been around for many, many years. And it just happens to be over the past maybe decade or so that really smart people have kind of looked at this problem of, we know that this intervention works, but let's see how we can get around this issue of GI distress. And so these different delivery mechanisms started to emerge in the space, and some of which are actually kind of quite clever that you and I have both have both experienced. So I would say to just kind of like set the table a little bit. It's been used for a long period of time. We know what the limitations are. We actually know pretty well what the dosing that you need is, and that's relatively rare from the supplement perspective. Like how much do you actually need? But we've always had kind of this continual problem of, how do we get around the GI distress? And so enter into this like new world, right, where food technology starts to take over, and we have these really novel ways of delivering the substance that we know works.
Yeah, it's a kind of an exciting time, I think, with some of the supplements and food industry, because I don't know, I feel like an old coach whenever I say, "Oh, there's nothing new under the sun; everything just cycles back." But I think that the transmission, right, of especially like sodium bicarbonate, that is kind of new. That's bypassing this GI stress, and kind of like the two things that we're talking about. Like we're brand neutral here, but like sodium bicarbonate is the thing, and these two new things are the Morton bicarb and then PR lotion, which is not that super new, but a PR lotion, transdermal transporter of sodium bicarb to the muscles. Morton is this goopy paste thing that we'll talk about, that you can eat and get the sodium bicarbonate in. But before we get there, Coop, what are the benefits of sodium bicarbonate? Like if we would just say like a little bit more specifically, rather than making you mediocre to somewhat above mediocre of an endurance athlete.
Well, here's the deal. With any sort of supplement like this, with any sort of intervention, I very jokingly say that it made me from less than a mediocre runner to a mediocre runner. And I do think that people need to take that to heart. It's not going to it's not going to take you from 0 to hero overnight.
Yeah.
Maybe if you wanted to do like a 40K time trial, we can relate to this in like cycling terms. If you want to do a 40K time trial, maybe it's 1%. Right. 1 or 2%. And here's the thing. Well, I'll actually point out two things with this. First off, you can get 1 or 2% in a myriad of different ways, right? Tapering, exercise interventions, nutrition interventions. Here's a supplement intervention, right? You can kind of get 1 or 2%. They're not all additive, right? You kind of get it, and that's like, you kind of reach the total capacity of the athlete at that point. You're just kind of like trying to maximize the capacity that they inherently have with some sort of novel intervention. So that's the magnitude of the effect that we're looking at here, is one, maybe a couple of percent, maybe. And the important thing to remember with that is that normally that signal, that very small signal that you're getting from the intervention, is drowned out in a lot of other different types of noise, right? So all of the other things have to kind of be in alignment in order for that 1 or 2% to actually show up. You have to be really well rested and trained, and, you know, kind of show up to the start line with, you know, all of your ammunition and stuff like that. So it's an intervention to be used when everything else has been optimized, right? When everything else is going well, your training is going well, your recovery is going well, you're at a healthy, you know, weight for whatever type of event that you're doing. You're looking for that little kind of that little edge. So that's the first thing. It's like understand the magnitude. Second thing is you can use it either in a workout or from a race perspective. You know, I try to normalize it in 40K time trial, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with using this as some sort of enhancement to your day-to-day workouts in order to get a more productive workout, right? I mean, we're all trying to kind of like squeeze out the last little bit that we can do in these in these workouts, and this is a fine application of a supplement, of a nutrition type of intervention that can help, that can assist you in order to do that. Now, it's not an everyday thing, right? This isn't your multivitamin that you wake up and you guzzle down the hatch first thing in the morning. This is something that is very specific. And I think we'll get into why it is very specific, because of the actual compound itself is delivering a lot of sodium into the system. And people need to be very, 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 very careful with that. But for people who are Bicarb Curious, which is the title of this Time Crunch podcast, I think if you can wrap your head around the fact that it's a very specific intervention that you're using either to enhance high intensity workouts or to kind of optimize a race that you're using very specifically, that might make a small difference if you can get everything right. That's a really good context to put on this.
Yep, agreed. And you know, these marginal gains sort of interventions, the disclaimer is just like, hey, we can, in the way of a 40K time trial, we can get you 10, 15, or 20% just by training.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
exactly.
So 1 to 2%, cool. But like, let's get the training, let's get the sleep, let's get the fueling sorted first. So that said,
dude, 20% training, man, that's like big, dude. You're a better coach than I am. If I get 20% training,
hey man, you take somebody off the couch, you do some threshold training, get that glycolytic energy system, and do you can get some.
You're right. You're right though. If you have somebody that's like newer, and I think when people can
normies.
Yeah, normies. No, well, but here's the deal. Like, we did this years ago. You'll remember, we studied all of our athletes across all of our coaches, and we kind of asked them how much they improved. And it turns out it's about 12% over a 6-month period for a normal person. And so if you want to rack and stack, okay, how much improvement can I get from just training smart, right? Reasonable training. That's 10 or 12%. If you want to add any of these interventions, super high carbohydrate type of intervention, sodium bicarbonate intervention, there's a lot of different things. You know, those are very small fractions on top of that. And in some applications, those are meaningful. In other applications, like I said, the signal really doesn't kind of come through the noise. So contextualizing how much that potential improvement can be is actually really important in this type of context, because you want to see if it's a worthwhile intervention.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for those who, a lot of our listeners are, either seeking that optimization of their training, sleep, and all this kind of stuff, and are almost in that position to look at this 1 to 2% stuff. So it's applicable for sure. So let's talk about that. Like, how it can work since we established that it can work. We're all endurance athlete folk here. So are we saying that, I mean, we've used the 40K time trial analogy, but what kind of time frame of, or what kind of like duration of exercise does the research say that bicarb targets in the way of high intent, or in the way of performance?
Yeah. So the what you want to think about is really high intensity exercise or races. So anything under 10 minutes, the effect tends to be realized more.
Mm-hmm.
So in the cycling world, this would be criteriums, mountain bikes, short, kind of short track races and things like that. There's a lot of good research around using this to improve repeated sprint performance,
Mm-hmm.
kind of in the middle of a time trial or something like that. So that's why I bring up the criterium example. I don't think this is where we start to like cross into different worlds, right?
Yeah.
I don't know the use case, or I don't understand the use case once the duration of the event starts to get beyond 60 minutes.
Same.
We do see that it's kind of popped up in my world, in the ultra marathon world, more recently. And for the life of me, I just don't understand. I don't understand the underlying physiology that could be altered with the intervention, and how it would produce a performance effect, right? How it would actually impact performance. But you do see it, and we have to recognize this, that even athletes that are in, the Ultra Trail du Mont Blanc, right, which is a 20-hour race for the winners, you see some of those athletes actually trying this, extremely novel intervention in the middle of the race, and they say that they
Mm-hmm.
feel better, right? I'm emphasizing those words intentionally. And so despite the fact that I don't understand it, we still have to pay attention to it. But if you really wanted to get to brass tacks on how to use this, I would start at the highest intensity side of things, your VO2 max intervals, your repeated sprint performances, and things like that. I think that those are the best use cases for it, because they're they're studied the most, and they're also the things where the physiology lines up with what should be happening the most as well.
Yep. Yeah. Agreed with that. And from everything that I've read, seen, and also just like practiced on myself and one of my other athletes, that stacks up in the way of hard intensity, perceived effort of 8 or higher, up to
Yeah.
max effort, repeated efforts, that kind of stuff, and stuff that is shorter than 60 minutes. I'll throw this out there, Coop, though, like ultra runners doing long stuff. I mean, would you say that the sodium alone could just be a benefit to what they're experiencing when they're 10 hours deep or more?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, we've theorized this for years, right? So the molecule that you're ingesting is sodium bicarbonate. It's a very, very simple compound. Once again, it's baking soda, right? Everybody's got it in their fridge or in their pantry. Very, very simple compound. When you ingest it, it immediately breaks down into the sodium component and into the bicarbonate component. And then from a physiology perspective, we thought, when we were originally using this, when I was trying to do it in college as a very mediocre runner, we thought that the bicarbonate component would somehow neutralize the acidic environment, either within the bloodstream and or within the muscle itself.
Which happens when you go hard, right?
Which
Acidic
happens when
environment
you go
increase.
hard,
Yep.
yeah. Which happens, and so that's the physiological theory behind why this actually would work. But you have to think to yourself, well, that's not all of what you're ingesting, right? There's sodium, and it's a lot. It's a lot of sodium that you're actually ingesting. In fact, the Martin bicarbonate system, I don't know if you paid attention to the directions, Adam, but they go to
Not the first
elaborate.
time.
Yeah, no, probably not. They go to this elaborate extreme of very specifically stating that this is not something that you take every single day, that you
Yeah.
might want to take twice a week. And the reason for that is some lawyer looked at how much sodium is being delivered to an individual, and they're very wary of the kind of the health complications. It's six for somebody my size. I'm a reasonably sized dude. I'm 165 pounds on a really light day, maybe 175 pounds on a heavy day. It's 6 grams of sodium per intervention. That's a lot, right? Just think about it in the context of your electrolyte drinks, right? Your electrolyte drinks have 500 milligrams per liter, right?
Oh.
That's 12 liters worth of salt that you are taking. It's 12 liters of electrolyte drink that or 12 liters of electrolyte drink to get that much salt into your system. That's a lot in one serving, I guess is my point there. And there are very real health consequences to doing that repeatedly or chronically. So we've thought for years that maybe some of the performance benefit that we might be seeing has to do with this like sodium loading effect, and particularly in hot environments where we use sodium loading protocols, quite frequently with athletes. Maybe that might be something that's actually that's actually going on. So the whole thing is we kind of don't know, right? We've taken this thing in for a high intensity perspective with a very specific physiological consequence. There's sodium and there's bicarbonate. We think that the bicarbonate somehow has some sort of ergogenic effect, but what happens to the sodium? That might actually be playing into what we're seeing from a physiological standpoint.
And going off the notes here for a second with that sodium loading component, because we've been doing that for quite some time, and there's various products out there. Scratch has their hyperhydration, Osmo has their preload, which is roughly, it's less than what Morton's talking about, but like 1,700 milligrams of electrolytes, primarily sodium for that. But what is that sodium loading before a hard or hot workout? What is that doing in the body? What's the benefit there?
Yeah, it shifts the plasma volume. So anybody who's ever done an ultra marathon who's really screwed up their sodium, we have one of my coaching colleagues, Adam St. Pierre, always tells this story. When he did Western States, it's a notoriously very hot race. He was taking in enough sodium to almost be very similar to the amount that you would actually use with a sodium bicarbonate type of product. He was taking in 5 or 6 grams of sodium in the first 10 hours of the race or something like that. It was deleterious for him because he ended up swelling up, right? The plasma volume has to go somewhere. So you have to understand that regulating the sodium within your plasma volume is one of your body's most highly regulated physiological processes. If you look at everything that your body wants to regulate, it's kind of pH and sodium balance. Kind of go those two things rise to the top of the list, because you can bonk, right? You can always come back from that. Nobody's going to die from bonking, but if you screw up your pH, right, or you screw up your electrolyte balance, those are things that you can actually die from. So your body wants to actually protect that. So when you ingest this huge amount of sodium into your system, it shifts the plasma volume markedly, and we think what happens is that more of that plasma volume can then be distributed in order to cool the body off. And so that's why these hyperhydration products essentially, or that's the mechanism that these hyperhydration products work out in the field, is because you're literally shifting the plasma volume so that you can radiate you can shift more of your blood flow to assist with radiative cooling as you're out there exercising, and then that has a performance effect. We kind of don't know how long that's going to last, right? Like when you actually ingest it in the field and things like that, and how quickly that plasma volume shifts. But that's the basic theory behind it. But I want the listeners to appreciate that it's these sodium bicarbonate products are not designed to do that. And you can look at it on the face of the amount of sodium that's being delivered. So Adam, you mentioned there are already these products out there. They're on the magnitude of about 3 grams of sodium per liter of fluid that you would ingest, right? So Scratch's product is, I think it's 1,750 milligrams that you're taking in a 500 milliliter shot, essentially. So one simple water bottle. You're not supposed to take more than that, right? They kind of limit it at maybe 2 grams at the very most. Here we're tripling that for a normal individual from a sodium bicarbonate perspective. So when I see these theories about, okay, maybe it's the sodium loading component that is actually creating the physiological effect, my initial thought is that's not the right dose. So I wouldn't, if this is the application, the sodium loading piece of it, I would go back and say, listen, we know we can get a more effective dose at a slightly lower amount of sodium. Why don't we just go do that, right? We're just kind of getting lucky with the intervention, essentially. So let's go back and we'll use a dose that actually that we know actually works.
Yeah, and I think you'd have to change the molecule a little bit, and it goes back to like some of the simplicity of just sodium bicarbonate or baking soda, right? And I'll talk about some of these protocols, but like the numbers I looked up before this podcast, like, yeah, the Morton, they give these products between 4 and 6 grams of sodium. That's what's happening, but it comes from a lot of the research, and one of which I was looking up for Master Zuckenrup, but their dosing, so their protocol is about 200 to 300 milligrams per kilogram of body weight of sodium bicarbonate, right? You take yourself, it's 75, kilograms, and that's going to be 15 to 22-ish sort of grams.
It's a lot. It's
a lot. But then when you run the math on it, because in 1 gram of sodium bicarbonate is 275 milligrams of sodium. So when you scale that out to the gram per dosage, you were in that range of 4 to 6 grams of sodium for the low and the high. And so all that to be said, if you want to decrease sodium, you'd have to, right, just take the bicarbonate. I don't know if like that's not applicable, but like that's why we're getting all this high sodium stuff in conjunction with bicarbonate.
And it needs to be that much bicarbonate to have an effect. So once again, this has been studied for years, going back to the 80s, right? And they've done it at different doses, and you just need a lot, and you see that in the products that are actually out there. Once again, I was just taking tablespoons of baking soda and mixing it in water, but now that you see the commercialized products, they recognize that there is an effective dose that you need in order to produce the ergogenic effect. And it's a lot of bicarbonate, if that is what is actually happening. And let's just say that that's kind of, we see the effect in the research, but it's still contested that that's the physiologically meaningful, right? Because once again, this pH balance is so tightly regulated within the body. It's one of the things that the body protects the most is your pH balance. So if you can ingest a lot of bicarbonate in order to throw that off, or in order to affect that, A, it takes a lot. B, you don't even know if that's actually what's happening because it's, like I said, it's so tightly regulated. But the take home message there is it's a lot of bicarbonate to actually take in, and this has always been one of the problems, is getting this kind of like massive dose into the body in some way to have a physiological effect, because whenever you have to take in that much of something, there are going to inherently be complications associated with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that being said too, like one of the ways that Morton claims to do that is their proprietary stuff that kind of like encapsulates and lowers GI, issue. And I'd say, like, I'm not going to get into the weeds about that. I would say when I've used that product, and this is like disclaimer for, because we're talking about all like jacking yourself on so much sodium. If you're sensitive to sodium, or if you have high blood pressure, like don't even go here.
Don't.
Because like I take it, you can feel it in your face, you can feel it in your body. Like it's just pressure. And I mean, I'm getting excited talking about it right now. I'm like, ooh, I should go jack myself on some sodium bicarbonate right now. That's good. But anyway, it really has an effect, and you're poofy, or at least I'm poofy for, a day or two afterwards. So there's like these lingering effects. And yes, that's the product that we're talking about. Don't use daily. I think with PR lotion, just to clear that up, I think you can use that daily. I don't know exactly like how much, per handful or whatever you're throwing on there. So don't quote us on that one. But yeah, definitely watch yourself if you're in that 200 to 300 milligrams per kilogram of body weight dosage. Don't do that every day. Disclaimer.
I agree with that. This is not a daily supplement. It is not a daily multivitamin.
No.
Like, is a very, very specific intervention. And the amount that you're mentioning, that has always been my contention with a transdermal delivery system.
Yeah.
Is it's extremely difficult to control the dose outside of all of the other logistical issues that,
Right.
everybody can kind of realize, like, I'm going to rub this on my legs and then I'm going to go and run or ride, or kind of what, like, that whole, this is just kind of a rigmarole. The dosing piece of it, because it has to be such a high dose, right? Of bicarbonate to actually make a difference. But B, because you're using a transdermal delivery system, you don't really know how much of that dose is actually getting into the body, versus if you're just ingesting it, you take in 200 milligrams of something, it's in your system, right? It's going to go through your GI system in some form or fashion. But when you're doing it transdermally, it's a reasonable delivery system. You just don't know how much is actually getting delivered transdermally, because there are all these other effects kind of going on, like basically the property of the skin, right? It's meant to be a barrier from the outside world, and who knows how much of it is actually getting absorbed through the skin in that type of application.
Yep, 100% agree. I'll also link to more research, but with both the lotion and the Morton product too, for anybody who's interested in reading some of that. But I'd say, Coop, just like straight up, would you recommend a sodium bicarbonate option for Bicurious athletes listening to us?
So if you're Bicarb Curious, we have to make sure it's not Bicurious. This is a different podcast.
Did I say
if you're
that? Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry, I was on a different podcast. Bicarb Curious.
If you're bicarbonate, if you're sodium bicarbonate curious. Once again, I think it's a reasonable intervention to try if you understand the context of the type of performance it can improve, which is namely very high intensity performance. And I'm going to go through two different ands. And you understand the magnitude of the performance improvement that you could get. It's very small. It's not nearly as meaningful as training or any of these other types of interventions that we can go through. And you realize what kind of the limiting factors are. You can't use it every day. There could be some GI distress, even with the Martin system. If you're using a transdermal system, you might actually be getting the dosing wrong and things like that. If you're willing to kind of go through all those different leaps, then great, go have at it. But here's we can always drill down to our practice to kind of see the worthiness of the intervention. Right? Both of us, we work with athletes. We're full-time coaches. That's all I do every single day. I don't recommend this a lot. I'm not going out of my way to say, hey, dude, you need to ingest your sodium bicarbonate before this workout. I'm not going out of my way to do that. Do some athletes do it? Sure. Yeah, absolutely. But it's not something that I'm putting in Training Peaks. Right. And so what I'm trying to drill down with the audience here is that I wouldn't go out of my way to do this type of to use this type of intervention, either from a workout or for a race. So yes, it can be effective, but it's not very high on my priority list of things to do, because when I rack and stack all of the interventions and all the different types of training that I'm doing, it just doesn't kind of rise to the level of, I need to put this in Training Peaks, right? That's my ultimate litmus test. Does it rise to the level of where I need to put it in Training Peaks? And there are interventions that rise to that level, quite often. And there are other interventions that just don't make it there very, very frequently. I can go into my stable of 40 athletes right now and maybe look at a year's worth of training, and I can probably find this come up once or twice. That's the frequency that this intervention is being used amongst my kind of athlete stable. So I hope that contextualizes how for the audience, I hope it contextualizes how frequently we would use something like this.
Yeah, I think it does. And two, we got a group text going tonight, Coop's on there too. And we were kind of bantering back and forth. And I was like, I have 2 or 3 athletes where this would actually be applicable of my stable of athletes. And it's
Yeah.
And I think that messaging should definitely come across as such. So,
Yeah.
In summary, sodium bicarbonate, nothing new under the sun. It has been shown to improve performance in high intensity situations. There's sodium. There's also the neutralizing effects of the bicarbonate going on with this ergogenic aid. But GI distress, cost, high sodium intakes for some people, those can all be drawbacks to taking this intervention on. Anything else you want to add in those summary points, Coop?
I totally forgot about the cost. It's a $15 intervention. Like if you're using the Martin product,
The
right?
Martin
If
product,
you're using the Martin product,
like 15 to 20. Yeah.
No, it's an expensive intervention. Like once again, coaching is expensive too. So I'm not going to like knock like people throwing money at the problem, right? I mean, you throw money at performance all the time from different perspectives. Whether it's aero wheels or coaching or nutrition intervention or whatever, that's totally fine.
12% improvement from a coach versus 1% improvement from sodium bicarbonate.
I know.
Cost benefit ratio.
No, I'm totally with you there. But yeah, you're right. We didn't mention the cost specifically with the Martin products. Baking soda is pretty cheap, on the other hand. There is I would say if listeners out there are interested in this intervention, outside of making sure that you're not hypertensive, that you're just a healthy individual, your blood pressure is normal, go ahead, try it, see how you feel. There's a number of different delivery mechanisms that you can use. And if you see an ergogenic effect, great. You can kind of like take that to the bank. I will say that Martin must be selling a lot of these. Because I had to like, because you go through the way that for the listeners out there, you go through this process of what dose do you need, essentially. Like it's a pretty nifty little like questionnaire, and it's kind of like, it's not meant to be what do they call the purchases when you're in the line at the grocery store? An impulse buy.
Impulse.
Right? It's a considered purchase, right? And so they take you through that consideration by trying to get you into the right dose. How much do you weigh? All this kind of other stuff. I had to fake my weight to like get the product because
they were out of the one.
They were out at my normal weight. So I said I was like, like 90 kilos, like that, like, and but it's so anyway. I just, I mean, for once again, I mean, they must be selling a lot of them because I couldn't get my hands on them. So obviously, athletes are kind of drawn to it for whatever reason, whether it's marketing or the elite athletes are kind of pushing them into it or whatever. So I'm not going to knock it that people are actually kind of using this stuff. I do think that people need to put the right context around it, as we were mentioning earlier.
Yeah, completely agree. Well, Coop, I think that ends our Bicarb Curious podcast for the day.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, you're very welcome. If our audience here that love to ride bikes, if they're curious to get more of Coop, where can they find you?
It's pretty easy. My handle is just my first and last name, Jason Coop with a K, on both Instagram and Twitter. I've been spending more time on Instagram lately. And you can also check my website out, which is just my first and last name, jasoncoop.com. You can also subscribe to my podcast, which is the Coopcast with a K. And it's mainly an ultramarathon centered podcast, but we do have a lot of topics that really go across all different endurance spectrums. I try to do a really good job of curating content and getting in front of people that are really at the forefront of endurance research topics, whether it be ketones. I had some of the ketone researchers on a few weeks ago, or neuroscientists that can kind of explain what our relationships with pain are or whatever. I try to make it applicable to all different types of endurance athletes.
Yeah, I think the Venn diagram of all things endurance would be found quite relevant in the Coopcast for a lot of our listeners too. So definitely go check them out there. And if you make your way to Colorado Springs and have a pair of binoculars, look at Pikes Peak and you'll probably find him coopling around somewhere.
That's right.
Peak. Yeah,
that's right.
Well, Coop, thank you very much for joining us on the Time Crunch Cyclist podcast today. Good luck with your runners out there in the upcoming event. And yeah, look forward to the next podcast we do together.
Thanks, man. It's always good to touch base with you.
Yeah. See you.